Hey everyone, so in the last video that I posted, I said that I was going to talk today about my planning process, and I mentioned the name Michael Hauge. Now, Michael Hauge is a screenwriter who a lot of novelists, a lot of authors have taken his 3-act screenwriting planning system and applied it to books. And before you kind of discount that and say, well, that's for screenwriting, we're writing books, the thing that I really want you to think about, and the thing that I've really come to grips with, is we definitely live in a different culture than our parents, our grandparents, their parents lived in. And whether you like it or not, most people today are used to watching TV, watching movies, watching videos from the time that they're very little kids. And that is the stimulation that they get. So as an author, if I can write a book that mirrors the planning and the structure and the pacing of a movie, there's a much higher likelihood that I'm going to engage an audience that has literally been programmed to watch a story from that standpoint. It's probably why some of the classics like Moby Dick and A Tale of Two Cities and The Scarlet Letter and even The Great Gatsby just don't capture the attention of kids today. And as much as you or I might like those books, I gotta be honest, I don't like Scarlet Letter, but when I was an English teacher, I recognized this and I stopped teaching those books. I started teaching to books that were written within the last 20 years because not only the content, but also the structure was much more written for a modern audience. And that's who, again, going back to what is the reason why you write. And for most of us, we want to write to make at least a little bit of money. The people that you are targeting are going to be those younger audiences, probably somewhere between 18 to 50. And if you're 18 to 50, or even younger, I mean, if you're writing middle grade or YA, if you're younger to 50, the reality is you've been programmed by watching TV your whole life. Okay, so for me, Michael Hauge has been a great planning system. Michael Hauge is broken up not only into 3 acts, but it's also broken up into percentages. And I'm going to talk about percentages and put up on the screen some visuals that might help you. And I'm going to try to use a popular example to kind of illustrate how some authors have kind of even unwittingly done this. So the example I'm going to use is The Hobbit. I'm a fantasy guy, so I'm going to use a classic, The Hobbit. And I'm going to use it because J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, published it in 1938. I might be a couple years off on that, but I believe it was 1938. And so he wrote The Hobbit to an audience that definitely was not programmed by an inundation of TV, and yet The Hobbit actually does a really good job of following the Michael Hauge system, okay? So if you have a pen and paper or something like that, that'd be great to write this down. Again, I'll put it in the description, and I'll put some graphics up on the screen as I'm talking about it so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So Michael Hauge, the first, what you're going to do, or what I do when I use Michael Hauge, is I plan everything out 0 to 10%, 10%, 10 to 25%, 25%, 25 to 50%, 50%, 50 to 75%, 75%, 75 to 90%, 90 to 99%, and then 100%. And I actually write those down now using the program I use now, Scrivener. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot in to each one of these percentage ranges or percentage points what's happening, what's going on in my story. Again, the first thing you need to do is write down what happens at the beginning, what happens at the end. You know the beginning, you know the end. Now it's time to fill in a general idea of what's happening in the middle. These turning points need to be pretty solid. Are they flexible? Can the first turning point happen at 11%? Sure. But if it happens at 20%, we're going to lose the audience. And as a fantasy, if you're a fantasy or sci-fi writer where there's a lot of world building and character introduction, it's really easy to lose our audience. So we definitely don't want to do that, okay? So that first 0 to 10%, that's the beginning of our book. And, normally we're gonna have a protagonist or several protagonists. And according to Michael Hauge, in this stage, this is stage 1, this is the setup. We are creating the story, and our protagonist, whoever they are in their own element. They are who they are. Now, in any story, our protagonist needs to, and I know that's a black and white hard statement, our protagonist needs to change. They need to have some sort of character development. And it is my firm belief if that doesn't happen in your story, then we need to rethink our story, okay? So 0 to 10%, we have our protagonist and they're just kind of chucking along like they normally would. Again, I will talk about characterization, and so hopefully you know who your character, your main character or main characters is or are. And they're existing in their normal, when they respond to situations, they would respond how they normally would respond. They would react how they would normally react, okay? So that's your first 10% of the book. For me, the other thing that I do is, I figure most of my books are 60 to 70 chapters. So I would say the first 7 chapters, my main character or main characters are going to be in their own element, unchanged. They are who they are. Now here's your first turning point. Here's your first change. Here's your first kind of significant event in the book. And that's not to say that you can't open a book with amazing action, a fighting scene, a love scene, whatever the case may be. Those are all great things. But at 10%, we're going to have turning point 1, and that is the opportunity. Okay, your main character is now presented with an opportunity, and even though they may not see it, the big thing about this opportunity, right, and one of the things that I love about Michael Hauge is Michael Hauge really addresses these things from both a physical and emotional / psychological standpoint. So that turning point 1 is not only an opportunity for your main character to make a physical change, but it's also an opportunity for your main character to make an emotional, psychological, and mental change. Again, think of The Hobbit. If you've never read The Hobbit, I would strongly encourage you to do so. The movies are great, but you got to read the book. Bilbo Baggins is a normal hobbit. He smokes his pipe, eats a lot, he has hairy feet, and he reads the mail. And all of a sudden, Gandalf the Grey, this wizard, shows up and has a really interesting conversation with Bilbo. Bilbo kind of blows him off. And that night, a bunch of dwarves show up. And this is really the turning point number 1 in The Hobbit. Bilbo Baggins has an opportunity to make a change. And even though the main character might not see it, your audience is going to see that, oh, here's the point where the protagonist, the main character, is actually going to start to change and develop and grow into a new person. Because when we pick up a book, we kind of understand that's what's going to happen. So between 10 to 25% of the book, right? This is the next stage. This is still in Act 1 if we're following the act system, but this is the next stage, the second stage of the book. This is this is a new situation. This is a development within the story, right? So again, for most sci-fi fantasy books, this is the beginning of the adventure. Your main character has probably stepped out onto a limb, taken a leap of faith, and has agreed to this new idea, this new journey, even though they don't necessarily want to change. They don't necessarily like the idea of change, but they are agreeing to go on a journey that we know as the audience is going to be life-changing for them, okay? So that is 10 to 25%. Again, so for me in a 70-chapter book, these are chapters like 8 through 18, 8 through 20. Again, there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but you don't want too much wiggle room. One of the things that we need to really understand about this 10 to 25% portion of your book, this new opportunity, is it needs to be very exciting, for lack of better terms, to your main character. It can be scary, it can be concerning, but definitely exciting. Probably lots of anxiety, but still we go back to that concept of exciting. This is exciting, it's new for him or her, and part of this section is that your character may not necessarily know how exactly to respond to these situations. Again, they're still trying to respond the way they always have. And one of the things that we can do as an author in these sections is show that the way that they are responding, the way that they would normally respond, isn't working, right? So we want to show some growth in this, a little growth. We don't want to show a ton of growth. We're not going to give away the character revelation that our main character is going to have by the end of the story, but we're going to definitely show some growth in our main character in this section. Now, 25%, this is turning point number 2. And turning point number 2, Michael Hauge refers to as a change in plans. And what happens here is the protagonist changes what they've been doing. And when I say that, I don't mean that they're necessarily physically changing, although they could be physically maturing or physically growing. They're not all of a sudden suggesting that they don't want to go on this journey. But again, going back to like Bilbo Baggins and The Hobbit, you know, there's definitely some physical change, but for Bilbo Baggins, this point becomes more of a mental adjustment for him. You know, he's starting to realize that the world outside of Hobbiton is much bigger. And I think if you really read into the book The Hobbit, there is there's a little bit of anxiety there, and maybe even a little bit of sadness and frustration that there's this huge world that he's never been exposed to. I think we really see that as they enter into the elven city of Rivendell, where Elrond, the High Elf King, lives. And in The Hobbit, that is turning point number 2. It's roughly 25% of the way through the book, and it's a point where Bilbo Baggins starts to really realize that some sort of change needs to happen, right? Now, the thing that I will say about this 25% turning point is, I think in order to make it very believable, you definitely want your main character or main characters to have a little bit of pushback. We're all human, and even if we're writing about a character that's not human, we normally instill them with human traits or qualities. And you know, we don't like change. No one likes change. No one fully embraces change right off the bat. And so for this to become really believable, I think it's really important for us to create a character that's going to push back against that change a little bit. But this also launches us into Act 2. And Act 2 is going to be about 50% of the book. It's going to be the major bulk of our book. Okay, so I'm going to actually create another video because I don't want these long 20 to 30 minute videos. If you're like me, you start to tune out and you just lose interest. So you can certainly watch all 3 of them together if you want, or you can break them up, especially if you're a busy author who's trying to get some writing in. I would strongly encourage you to go write right now, okay?